Well, it's a little late, but better late than never, right? We hope you're kicking off 2024 in the best way. Happy New Year! It's Seraphin here, and today we're going to make a soft, fluffy, and flavorful sourdough shokupan. This is going to be a great combination of the distinctive approach to making milk bread using gelatinized starch, Tangzhong or Yudane, and the oldest form of leavened bread, sourdough. Both the Tangzhong and sourdough methods of bread making have been known to produce breads with unique characteristics that possess many advantages over other regular white breads. By making a shokupan bread with sourdough, we expect to produce a bread with even more complex flavors, textures, and potential health benefits. To make this bread, here is the list of ingredients that we're going to incorporate into our dough. In our previous videos on shokupan, we have discussed the decision-making behind the selection and measurement of most of these ingredients. So we're not going to talk about each and every aspect of the process all over again. Instead, we're going to focus our attention on the details of the combination of tangzhong and sourdough in this unique shokupan bread. So to start with, we're going to make the tangzhong. So I'm going to pour in 115 grams of boiling hot water. Too much. Okay, just a little bit. 15 grams of rice flour and 65 grams of bread flour. All right, I'm going to set this aside and immediately mix everything together. There we go. Okay. And there is a reason for me adding rice flour first just now. It's because rice has a higher gelatinization temperature, so make sure you add the rice flour first if you can, or mix everything together. Okay, so this is what it should look like when it's pretty much done. Looks pretty good. Just gonna clean off the sides. Now I'm gonna cover it with this cloth, just like this. Now we're gonna let it cool to room temperature before putting it in the fridge, and it should stay there for at least one night. 24 hours is even better if you have the time. Now, let's pause for a moment to understand what's going on here. In essence, at this stage, we have started a physico-chemical process as the first step of making our sourdough shokupan. Roughly speaking, we have just gelatinized about 23% of the flour. We've done it with the intention of using it at a later stage after it has rested overnight or even longer in the fridge at 4 degrees Celsius. By subjecting this much flour to heat treatment, we enable the starch within to absorb much more water. This is due to the fact that gelatinized starch granules can absorb water as much as 20-fold of their dry mass. We can then push the optimal dough hydration to slightly above 71%, as shown in this paper. This process also helps jumpstart the endogenous enzymes alpha amylase and beta amylase in the wheat flour that we use for the tangzhong. Alpha amylase more or less randomly breaks down long chains of polysaccharides of starch because it is capable of working anywhere along the chain. It's typically faster acting than beta amylase, which works on the non-reducing end of the chain. Beta amylase cleaves off maltose from this end. Gelatinization speeds up this process because beta amylase works on damaged and gelatinized starch, and by allowing the tangzhong to rest in the fridge overnight or longer, we give these enzymes a head start on producing more maltose and, to a lesser degree, some other reducing saccharides. Maltose is the essential reducing sugar that will serve as nutrients for the key microorganisms of our sourdough. Maltose and other saccharide contents, along with the high moisture content, also contribute to the slow staling and unique texture of our tangzhong bread. On top of that, we get a natural wheat flavor and sweetness without needing to add too much sugar. Okay, for the next step, we're going to prepare our levain, or levain. To make a levain, we start with a mature sourdough starter. A mature sourdough starter is predictable in its rises and falls over a long period of regular refreshments or backsoppings. At its last refreshment, it should have doubled in size within a predictable amount of time at the temperature we stored it. At a room temperature between 27 to 30 degrees Celsius, that usually means 3 to 4 hours. If your room temperature is way below that, it may take up to 24 hours or even more. In the fridge at around 4 degrees Celsius, you can usually leave it for about a week before another refreshment is called for. At its peak, it should be bubbly and floaty. It should not be totally deflated, runny, or even worse, have hooch, a sort of liquid on top of it, which indicates that the food in the flour is practically gone. To make a levain, you should only use a recently refreshed starter that is at its peak. And here I've got my mature sourdough starter that's actually already doubled since the last time I backswapped it, meaning it's ready to use. So now I've got 50 grams of water already inside this glass, as well as 50 grams of bread flour. Okay, I'm gonna measure in 25 grams of starter into this glass. So the total ratio will be something like 1 to 2. All right, just let that come out. As you can see, it's floating, which is a very good sign. All right, so we're done with the scale. I'm gonna move it aside. So lovely. All right, I'm just gonna add in the 50 grams of bread flour, throwing all of it in. And I love to mix everything together with chopsticks. It's so easy. Okay, you can see that it's basically homogeneous. It's all done. So I'm just gonna clean off my chopsticks. And then I'm gonna clean up the sides of the glass so we can see our levain. Beautiful. Now I'm gonna cover this. I'm also gonna put a rubber on it. I should have put the rubber on first to indicate its current level. So it's at this point, and we're expecting this to at least double. So it should get up to around here because the grass expands outwards. A levain lets us scale up our sourdough starter. It is essentially a larger batch of starter that will all end up in our dough. It gives our dough the much needed large number of microorganisms and hence the gassing power to leaven it. That's why in this recipe, we only need 25 grams of starter to begin with. And by adding 50 grams of flour along with 50 grams of water, we end up getting the rough equivalent of 125 grams of sourdough starter. A levain also gives us the chance to change the flavor profile of our sourdough starter and eventually our bread. So as we scale up our sourdough starter using a levain, we also change the flavor profile due to new nutrients from the fresh flour and water. Here we've just made a overnight slow levain in a 1:2 proportion of starter to water to flour. The way I usually do this is to let it rise for about an hour or so on the counter at around 27 to 30 degrees Celsius and then move it in the fridge and let it slowly rise overnight. Then I use it along with the prepared Tangzhong the next day. If you prefer a different schedule, you could just let the levain rise quickly on the counter at 27 to 30 degrees Celsius for 3 to 5 hours and use it on the same day. This one took about 3.5 hours at 29 degrees Celsius. You want to use your levain just a few moments after it peaks, like this one. Now, you may be tempted to use your levain before its peak, say to save time, but later on during bulk fermentation, it may end up taking way longer than it should take since the microorganisms in such a levain have yet to fully populate it. Once it is mixed into new flour and water, there will be a lag phase before the microorganisms are able to begin the rapid growth required to raise the dough. If bulk fermentation takes extra time because of this lagging, gluten structure can break down excessively. This is due to microbial acidification that shifts the dough pH to the pH optimum of the proteolytic enzymes in the flour, speeding up their activity in breaking down the gluten proteins. This may bring many beneficial outcomes in small amounts, such as producing more complex flavors, improving porosity, and contributing to better bread volume. But large amounts of proteolytic activity will get rid of too much gluten and turn your dough into a sour, soupy mess that won't rise well in the oven. If your levain fails to rise, as a quick fix, you can add a small amount of baker's yeast in the final dough, 0.2% of the weight of the flour. This is actually a normal practice in many parts of the world where bread is regulated by the law. All right, so now that our levain and our Tangzhong are ready, we can start making the final dough. So I'm just gonna get started immediately. Gonna drop in my Tangzhong. And then our levain, as you can see, it's more than doubled. I'd say it's almost tripled here. So I'm just going to add that in. Look at that. Okay. And then we're adding in 60 grams of milk. Just pouring that right in. 10 grams of water. 20 grams of sugar. Sprinkling it in. 6 grams of salt. And 200 grams of bread flour. Now that's not our last ingredient. We also have 20 grams of butter. We've measured it and we're leaving it out to soften. We're gonna wait until this becomes more cohesive. Gonna mix it for about 3 minutes before adding in the butter and then mixing that until it reaches full gluten development, which is another about 9 to 10 minutes. Just before we go to the mixer, I'm just gonna mix everything together for just about a minute. Just want to prevent the flour from flying everywhere by getting it in there. Not doing too much, of course. All right, let's go to the mixer. I am very sure that this dough has reached full gluten development, but just to double check, we can do a quick window pane test. So I'm gonna take a small portion of the, oh, just look at how it stretches. It's already so beautiful. Okay, I'm just gonna pull it up and then I'm gonna stretch it out. Ooh, look at that strength. Okay, since it passed the window pane test flawlessly, we're just gonna continue on and get it ready for its bulk fermentation. I'm just scraping down the sides of the bowl. All right, and now I've got this glass bowl, which we're gonna use as the bulk fermentation resting spot. Gonna add a bit of vegetable oil just to line the sides. Shouldn't need too much, just enough to line both your hands and the bowl. All right, now let's get it out. One scoop. I'm gonna set that aside and we're just gonna round this into a nice little bowl. Nice and even shape. Beautifully smooth. This is how it should look. I'm gonna set it inside the bowl. And I'm gonna cover that and we're gonna leave it to double in size. So this depends a lot on your sourdough's condition as well as your room temperature. So you really wanna make sure to keep an eye on the dough. So here is what we know. This final dough being incorporated with Tangzhong contains more maltose than regular dough. This could lead to a faster acidification of our sourdough by the lactic acid bacteria, which, as mentioned before, can speed up the activity of proteolytic enzymes in breaking down the gluten proteins. Using Levain before its peak or way after it can compound the problem by extending the required bulk fermentation time due to insufficient populations of sourdough microorganisms. That's how you get a super sour, soupy mess instead of a leavened dough. But here's the catch. Most of this information about the metabolism of maltose is assuming that you have a maltose-positive lactic acid bacteria species, such as Fructilactobacillus sanfrancisensis, which often forms a stable association with maltose-negative yeast species, such as Kazakhstania humilis and Saccharomyces cerevisiae. Without the knowledge of taxonomy and the lab instruments needed to identify the species of lactic acid bacteria and yeast that constitute our sourdough, being a home baker, we have to rely on some practical, simple experiments, such as this one, to tell us how the fermentation may take its course and what are the rises and falls of our sourdough and how they look like. Of course, we can complement this empirical information with the general knowledge of a traditional sourdough from many references. Sourdough conditions, especially the fermentation temperatures, play an important role with regards to the microbial composition of these sourdoughs, so you may not have these same microbes in your starter. Still, even if the excessive metabolism of maltose by lactic acid bacteria doesn't take place, a prolonged bulk fermentation at warm room temperatures has the risk of accelerating the activity of proteolytic enzymes. If you want to prolong the bulk fermentation, long fermentation in the fridge at a low temperature is the way to go. The acidity of the sourdough depends on lactic and acetic acid production by lactic acid bacteria. Usually low temperatures of sourdough fermentation delay the lactic acidification and decrease the time of yeast exposure to high acidity. A low fermentation temperature was suggested as a means to improving the synthesis of carbon dioxide by yeasts. There's another aspect to consider. Acidification inhibits amylase activity and prevents starch degradation during baking. Consequently, although the Tangzhong does help, we should expect less natural sweetness in the resulting bread. But to be clear, we are not losing out on much. The extra boost in maltose metabolism produces more beneficial metabolites of sourdough, including new nutritionally active compounds such as vitamins, biogenic peptides, and potentially prebiotic exopolysaccharides, all good things. Okay, so now that the dough has doubled in size, we're now going to move on to the next step, which is dividing and pre-shaping it. So I'm going to remove this silicone mat, I'm going to set this aside, and I'm going to use some bread flour, sprinkle the top of the dough, as well as leaving a bit on our work surface. Using my scraper, I'm going to scrape down and get it out. I'm preparing for this to be a little sticky because it is a sourdough dough. Okay. I'm going to weigh the whole thing first. 635, divide that by 2, that's roughly 317 and a half, about that much. Just going to divide this straight away into 2, like that. Okay, and after they're of an equal weight, I'm just going to quickly shape them into 2 round bowls. It's just a pre-shaping step. Don't need it to be too taut. Give them a bit of flour, prevent them from sticking to each other. And I'm just going to cover them with the glass bowl. And I'm going to leave them to relax for about 10 minutes as a bench rest. Okay, so while the dough rests and relaxes, I'm just going to line our baking pan with some non-stick coating. All right, so the 10 minutes are up, and I'm just going to immediately start shaping these. A bit more flour. I'm going to move the right one aside. I'm going to flip this one over. And using this rolling pin, I'm going to flatten it out into a wide, long sort of rectangle. I'm going to use my fingers to straighten out the corners. It will be sticky. It is a sourdough dough. Be warned. Okay, that looks pretty okay. Gonna pull that out. You want to make sure to try to degas all of these big bubbles. Okay. All right, that looks pretty good. gonna fold in the sides like this, going for this line here. Other side in. Okay. I'm just gonna move that aside a little bit. Making sure that's neat and tidy. I'm gonna go over it one more time with the rolling pin. You can see all those bubbles coming out. There you go. Make sure to degas them. Those nice sides. I'm also going to pin down the bottom here. Okay. Now we're going to roll this up. So nice and easy, a little bit sticky. It's perfectly fine. Just keep going. Okay. And we are done. Just need to pinch to seal. Give it a bit of flour so it doesn't stick on the surface. And there we go. Okay, our first roll is done. I'm gonna give it a little more flour just to prevent it from sticking to anything. And now it's time to work on shaping our second one. Get enough flour at the bottom. That rectangular shape. Making sure to degas it really well. So now we want to put these two rolls inside the loaf pan, and we want to make sure that these rolls are in opposing directions. So. Okay, second one in. And now just gonna press them down, make sure they really settle in. We're also fixing any imbalances that there are. It's your last chance to move them around. Okay. Very good. Now I'm just going to cover it. And now we're going to leave it to proof for about 2 to 3 hours or until it's just below the lid. I'd say about 3 centimeters below the lid. Okay, so the dough is fully proofed. We're now going to bake this. So we've already preheated the oven to 190 degrees Celsius. We're going to bake it on top and bottom heat for 15 minutes before turning it to bottom heat for another 20 minutes. Every oven is different, so make sure to adjust this to your specific oven. And it's done! And that's it for today. Thank you for watching, and bye!